I've always been the reliable one, the guy who shows up 15 minutes early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever the day throws at me. So when I woke up that Tuesday morning to 17 missed calls, and the realization that my alarm had somehow never gone off, I felt my entire world tilt sideways. I work at the lumber mill on the edge of town, and being late isn't just frowned upon, it's practically a fireable offence. Our supervisor Marcus doesn't tolerate excuses, and our production line runs like clockwork. If one person is missing, the whole operation suffers. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and saw it was already 7:45. My shift started at 7. I was 45 minutes late to a job where 5 minutes gets you written up. I threw on yesterday's clothes, didn't bother with breakfast, and drove to the mill going 15 over the speed limit the entire way. My mind was racing faster than my truck. This was my 3rd year at the mill, and I'd never been late once. Not once. I had a perfect record, and I was about to flush it down the drain because I apparently couldn't manage to set an alarm properly. But it wasn't just about the record. It was about letting down my team, especially Reed. Reed was my partner on the line, the guy I'd been paired with since my 2nd week on the job. We worked the main saw together, a partnership that required perfect timing and trust. If I wasn't there, Reed would have to manage alone, or Marcus would have to shuffle the entire line. When I finally pulled into the parking lot at 8:20, I sat in my truck for a full minute trying to compose myself. My hands were still shaking. I could see through the high windows that the line was running, which meant somehow they'd figured it out without me. That almost made it worse. I was replaceable. I took a deep breath and headed inside, already forming apologies in my head, already prepared for Marcus to call me into his office. But when I walked onto the floor, something strange happened. Marcus glanced up from his clipboard, nodded at me, and went back to his notes. No angry expression, no beckoning me over for a talking to, just a normal nod like it was any other day. I stood there confused for a moment before I looked over at the main saw. Reed was there, working smoothly, and when he saw me he just gave me this subtle smile and a small nod toward my station. I walked over, still completely baffled, and as I got close enough, Reed leaned in slightly, not breaking his rhythm with the lumber. His voice was low enough that only I could hear over the noise of the machinery. "Keep your head down and get to work. I clocked you in at 6:55. Told Marcus you were running the forklift in the back lot when he came through. He doesn't know." I froze. I actually froze mid-step, and Reed had to clear his throat to snap me back to attention. I moved to my position, my mind reeling. Reed had covered for me. He'd clocked me in using my card, which was technically against about 15 different company policies, and he'd lied to our supervisor. For me. I wanted to say something, to thank him, to ask him why. But the saw was running and we had work to do. So I fell into rhythm beside him, and we worked in our usual synchronized silence, but nothing felt usual about it anymore. Reed and I had always worked well together. From the start, there was this unspoken understanding between us. He was the kind of guy who didn't waste words, but when he spoke, it mattered. Tall, with these strong forearms covered in sawdust by the end of every shift, dark hair that he kept short, and these incredibly focused grey eyes that never seemed to miss a detail. I'd always respected him as a co-worker, appreciated his reliability and skill, but I'd never really let myself think about why I always felt more energized on days when we worked together, or why I'd sometimes catch myself watching the way he moved around the machinery with such confidence and precision. That day, though, something shifted. Maybe it was the vulnerability of being saved from a huge mistake, or maybe it was the realization that Reed had put himself at risk for me without hesitation. Throughout the shift, I kept stealing glances at him, seeing him differently. The way he'd handled the situation with such calm competence. The way he'd protected me without making me feel small or indebted. When lunch break finally came, I followed him outside to the picnic tables where most of the crew ate. I needed to say something even though I didn't know what. We sat down at our usual spot away from the larger group, and I opened my mouth to thank him, but he cut me off before I could start. "Don't mention it. Seriously, it never happened. You were here on time, everything's fine." He unwrapped his sandwich and took a bite, acting like the conversation was over. But I couldn't let it go. "Reed, you could get fired for what you did. Why would you risk that for me?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt something in my chest tighten. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "Because you'd do the same for me. Because we're partners, and because everyone deserves one free pass when life decides to mess with them. His voice was matter of fact, but his eyes held mine for a beat longer than necessary, and I felt heat creep up the back of my neck. The afternoon shift was strange. I couldn't stop being hyper-aware of Reed next to me. Every time our hands came close when reaching for tools, every time he leaned in to point something out, every time our shoulders brushed in the tight space around the saw, I felt this electric awareness that I'd never let myself acknowledge before. It scared me how much I noticed. The way his jaw tensed when he was concentrating. The small smile that flickered across his face when we completed a particularly tricky cut perfectly. The sound of his voice under the machinery noise, steady and sure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day, but especially that moment when Reed had looked at me during lunch. Because we're partners. What did that mean to him? What did it mean to me? I'd had girlfriends in high school and one semi-serious relationship in my early 20s that fizzled out. I'd never really questioned my attraction to women, but I'd also never felt anything as intense as what I was feeling lying in bed, thinking about my co-worker's hands and voice, and the way he'd protected me without asking for anything in return. The next few weeks were torture in the sweetest way. I started noticing everything about Reed. How he always brought an extra granola bar and would offer it to whoever seemed to need it most. How he knew everyone's names, even the new guys who'd only been there a week. How he stayed late one evening to help the maintenance crew fix a broken conveyor belt, even though it wasn't his job. I found myself looking forward to work in a way that had nothing to do with the paycheck and everything to do with spending 8 hours next to this man, who I was slowly realizing I had feelings for. Real feelings. The kind that kept me awake at night and made my heart race when I saw his truck pull into the parking lot each morning. But I didn't know what to do about it. Reed never talked about his personal life. I knew he lived alone in an apartment closer to town. I knew he'd worked at the mill for 5 years, longer than almost anyone else on our shift. I knew he was reliable and kind and strong and everything I apparently couldn't stop thinking about. But I didn't know if he dated women or men or anyone at all. I didn't know if that look during lunch had meant anything, or if I was projecting my own confused feelings onto a simple act of workplace kindness. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Friday, and a group from the mill was heading to Sullivan's, the bar downtown where the crew usually went to unwind. I normally didn't join, preferring to head home after shift, but Reed mentioned he was going, and before I could think better of it, I said I'd be there too. The surprise on his face made my stomach flip. Yeah? Cool. I'll see you there then. He smiled, a real genuine smile that reached his eyes, and I spent the entire drive home wondering what I was doing and why my hands were shaking again, just like that morning he'd covered for me. Sullivan's was packed when I arrived. I found our group at the back, crowded around 2 tables pushed together. Reed was there, already nursing a beer, laughing at something one of the forklift operators was saying. He'd changed out of his work clothes into a dark blue Henley that fit him in a way that made my mouth go dry. When he saw me, he waved me over and somehow made space next to him on the bench seat. For the next hour I was intensely aware of his thigh pressed against mine in the crowded space, the warmth of his arm when it brushed against me as he reached for his drink, the sound of his laugh up close. As the night wore on, people started peeling off. By 10, it was just me, Reed, and 2 other guys who were deep in a debate about football. Reed turned to me, his shoulder angled toward mine, creating this little bubble of privacy in the noisy bar. "You want to get out of here? There's a diner around the corner that makes incredible pie. I'm not ready to call it a night yet." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Yeah, let's do that." We walked to the diner through the cool night air, and I shoved my hands in my pockets to keep from doing something stupid like trying to hold his hand. What was wrong with me? This was Reed, my co-worker, my partner at the mill. The guy who'd covered for me, yes, but that didn't mean anything beyond friendship. Except the way he kept glancing over at me as we walked, the small smile playing at his lips, made me wonder if maybe I wasn't completely crazy. The diner was nearly empty, just us and an elderly couple in the corner booth. We slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee and pie, and suddenly we were talking in a way we never had before. Not about work, not about surface things, but real conversation. Reed told me about growing up in a small town 2 hours north, about his mom who'd raised him alone after his dad left, about how he'd come to this town for a fresh start 5 years ago. I told him about my family. about my younger sister who was in college studying engineering, about how I'd ended up at the mill after my plans for trade school fell through due to money issues. There was something in the way he listened, leaning forward slightly, his eyes never leaving my face, that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. And there was something in the way I couldn't stop talking, sharing things I rarely told anyone, that felt dangerous and exhilarating. When the waitress came to refill our coffee for the third time, I realised we'd been there for over 2 hours. The elderly couple had left. We were the only customers. "I should probably let you get home," Reed said. But he didn't move to get up. His hand was resting on the table between us, and I found myself staring at it, at his long fingers, at the small scar across his knuckles that I'd never asked about. "I don't want to go home," I said, and the honesty of it surprised me. "I'm having a really good time," he smiled then, soft and genuine. "Me too. I really like this. Talking to you like this. I feel like I'm finally getting to know you beyond the mill." There was something in the way he said it, in the way he was looking at me, that made my pulse race. I took a breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Reed, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "That day you covered for me. You said we're partners. What did you mean by that?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting to something more serious, more vulnerable. "I meant that I trust you, that I rely on you, that you matter to me." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "More than just as a co-worker, if I'm being honest." My breath caught. "More than a co-worker?" He nodded slowly, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was holding himself carefully, ready to retreat if he'd misread the situation. "Yeah, I've been trying not to make it obvious, but I'm apparently not great at hiding things from you. I've had feelings for you for a while now. Months, actually. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make things weird at work, and I didn't know if you'd even be interested. In me, in this." The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of us in that booth, the fluorescent diner lights casting everything in this surreal glow. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. "I'm interested," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "I'm very interested. I've been losing my mind trying to figure out what I was feeling, but, Reed, I can't stop thinking about you. I didn't even know I could feel this way about someone until you covered for me that day and I started really seeing you, and now I can't unsee it. I don't want to unsee it." The relief and joy that flooded his face made something in me crack open. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles, and it was the first time we'd really touched beyond accidental brushes at work. His hand was warm and calloused and perfect, and I never wanted him to let go. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice soft. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never done this before, any of this. Figured out I had feelings for a man. Actually told someone I had feelings for them, but I know I don't want to pretend I don't feel this way." "We can take it slow," Reed said. "We can figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just us, seeing where this goes." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realised I'd been carrying. I'd like that. He smiled and squeezed my hand, and we sat there for another moment, just looking at each other, before the waitress came over to tell us apologetically that they were closing. We paid and walked back to the parking lot where our trucks were parked, and the whole way Reed kept my hand in his, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. At my truck, he turned to face me, and we stood there in the empty parking lot under the streetlights. "I should say good night," he said, but he didn't move away. He was standing close enough that I could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You should," I agreed, but I didn't move either. We stood there, the tension building, and then Reed lifted his hand and cupped my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. When his lips met mine, everything else fell away. It was gentle and questioning at first, and then I kissed him back, and it deepened into something that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. His other hand came up to the back of my neck, and I gripped his waist, pulling him closer, and we kissed in that parking lot like teenagers, like we'd been waiting our whole lives for this moment. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, and Reed rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he whispered. "Me too," I said, even though I'd only consciously wanted it for a few weeks. But maybe some part of me had wanted it longer, had recognized something in Reed from the beginning that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of taking it slow, of stolen kisses in the parking lot after shift, of long nights at his apartment or mine, talking and laughing and learning each other. 6 months of keeping it quiet at work, not because we're ashamed, but because what we have feels precious and private, something just for us. We're still partners on the line, still working in that synchronized rhythm that now feels like an extension of everything else we do together. But now when our hands brush, it's deliberate. Now when he looks at me across the saw, I see love in his eyes, and I know he sees the same in mine. Marcus still doesn't know that Reed covered for me that day. Nobody does except us. It's our secret, the moment that changed everything even though I didn't know it at the time. Sometimes at night, lying in Reed's arms in his apartment, I think about that morning when I woke up late and panicked. I think about how one moment of vulnerability led to this, to us, to the happiest I've ever been. Reed says I would have figured out my feelings eventually, that some things are inevitable. Maybe he's right, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for his kindness that day, for his courage in telling me how he felt, for his patience as I figured out my own heart. Last week, Reed's lease was up and he moved into my place. We loaded his furniture into a borrowed truck on a Saturday, and some of the guys from the mill helped us move everything. They joked about us being roommates now, about how we spend so much time together at work that we must be gluttons for punishment living together too. We just smiled and didn't correct them. Let them think what they want. We know the truth. That night, after everything was unpacked and our friends had left, Reed and I stood in our living room, surrounded by the combined evidence of our lives, and he pulled me close. "Thank you for being late that day," he said with a smile. "Thank you for covering for me," I replied. "Thank you for never telling a soul." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I thought about how love finds you in the strangest ways sometimes. In a lumber mill, in a moment of panic, in a simple act of kindness that turns into everything.